Hey everybody, this is Caller ID. We're calling about your identity, your direction, and what you're doing with your life. I'm Brandon Davis Wells. Let's dig into what we're really doing here. Welcome to Where Life, Career, and Identity Meet. I am your host, Brandon Davis Wells. This is a space for honest conversations at the intersection of who we are, who we want to be, what we do, and why this all matters. Thanks for joining me on our pilot episode here of Caller ID. You're going to hear from people across industries, across backgrounds, across belief systems from all over the country, and folks with all kinds of different things to add that we can dive in and hopefully learn from each other. Identity is something that I've talked a lot about over the last few years. I've taught on it. I served as a career coach. I've served as a broadcaster. I've served as a varsity and a college baseball, basketball coach. A career coach led me into thinking, boy, there's a lot of folks that need this. And I think that we can, like I said, learn from each other. But I think also it's an opportunity for us to learn more about who we are and why it matters. This podcast exists because I've noticed this for the last, 5 or 10 years, and even really since probably the late 2009, 2010, when I heard some really interesting things, and we're going to get into that in a minute. But, a lot of us are busy. A lot of us are successful, however you want to define that. But a lot of us out there are still quietly asking, or maybe out loud, I don't really do anything quiet, is this really what I'm supposed to be doing? I heard that a lot from college students. What am I supposed to do with my life? What am I, what does God want me to do? What do my parents want me to do? If you're a person of faith, those are things that we're going to dive into in this podcast. I'm really looking forward to it and talking to folks and getting perspectives from folks from all around the spectrum. I will tell you that this show is going to live in that space. It's not just like career advice. It's not just like faith talk or hustle culture or your side hustle or whatever it is, but real conversations about identity, calling, purpose, leadership, and work. From some people in all kinds of industries. Some guests will talk openly about their faith and some will not at all, and that's perfectly fine. That's the world we live in. That's intentional. The questions, though, that we're asking in this are universal. There's things that really transcend background and faith and all of those kinds of things. One concept that I came across in the last few years was a Japanese concept called Ikigai, Ikigai. It's often described as a thing where 4 things overlap, and I taught about this a lot when I was teaching. That overlap, the sweet spot of 4 concentric circles, if you can think about it. Something you love, something that you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can get paid for, right? So that's the concept of Ikigai. And then right in the middle of those 4 circles is the sweet spot. So you got something you love, something you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for. Now, what I will say about that is that's easier said than done, right? I can sit here and tell you, these are the 4 things, and this is the 4 steps. You got to figure out these 4 things. Well, there's a lot of things that, I love that I'm not good at, or a lot of things that I love and I'm good at, but the world doesn't necessarily need, or I can't get paid for it enough to make a living, right? Because that's real. I talked with students about this all the time. You got to find something that kind of hits all 4 of those. And sometimes that doesn't necessarily mean from a career standpoint that you're going to find that and be able to do that your whole life, or even for a good portion of it. That might be you've got most of those and you're doing some of these on the side to sort of augment that. But what I want to come back to is that what we do for a job or for money to pay the bills does not necessarily identify or give us our identity. It shouldn't anyway. For a lot of us, it does, or it has. I spent a lot of time thinking that, my identity was as a coach when I was coaching varsity basketball and then college baseball. I spent time thinking, when I was broadcasting that, hey, if I don't get to the top, or if I'm not broadcasting certain levels of games, then, my identity or my personhood or my value is not as high as what I wish it was or should be. Those are all really kind of falsehoods that we tell ourselves. And I think that's part of what I'm going to hopefully get to with all of our guests as we talk through these kinds of things. I'm sure it'll be fun because that's, I like to bring energy and some fun into all of these. It's not going to be uber serious all the time, but it's not also going to be, full of jokes from start to finish. So that's just part of who I am and what I'm going to bring to the table as the host of this podcast. I do appreciate you jumping in here to the Caller ID podcast. Last December, I was at a party with my wife. We were at some friend's house. So we were with some people we knew, but most of the folks we did not know at all, and we were meeting new people. And like what happens in these situations, people say, oh, so, who are you? What do you do? And somebody asked me, they were trying to introduce themselves to my wife and I, and my wife said, this is my husband. And she paused for a second, and she remembered that I had switched over to having people call me Davis here in the South because that's really what I go by as a musician. And I thought, hey, let's just go a clean break. Let's go by Davis. She says, this is my husband, Davis. And they asked, well, what do you do? And I kind of paused for a second. And she said, he's a musician. I said, yeah, I guess that is. And so part of that really felt good because it sounds cool, right? It sounds neat. Oh, yeah, I'm a musician. Well, let's be honest. I've got one song out there, and it's probably gotten me about 50 cents in royalties. Now, I'm working on some things, but it's more of just for fun and working through what that is of what I get to do and what I have some gifts in and I have a passion for. Whether or not the world needs it, maybe. The world needs art. The world needs music. The world needs all of those kinds of things because it brings joy and some deep thinking to the lyrics, I hope, at times. Whether I can get paid for it, that's a whole different thing, right? Like, that's to be seen. So she says, hey, this is my husband, Davis. He's a musician. And it just led me to think back about, like, number one, I was kind of proud and like, yeah, I'm a musician. Like, I want people to think I'm cool and I'm interesting, right? Just to be frank. And so we walked out of there later that night, and I was like, yeah, I gotta make sure I tone that down in my own personhood, that doesn't become who I think I am. Because that means if I don't sell albums or I don't have a lot of streams of my songs, that maybe I'm failing in who I am, right? So you get that concept. It's the same thing as, if you're coaching a basketball team and you have 4 or 5 great seasons and then all of a sudden, you tail off and you're not doing well. I mean, does that mean you're not doing well as a human? So when we put our identity and we wrap it into the things that we get to do, it becomes a problem. So some of the things we're going to talk about with guests is just that. The concept of that goes back for me. I met a man named Rob Poole, who has now become a dear friend and really almost like a big brother to me. I do have a big brother already, but another big brother. And I will say, when I met Rob, I said, so what do you do? Standard question, right? American question. And I'll get back to this. I try really hard to not ask that question since then, because I really want to find out, what do people do for fun? Who are they outside of work? And then we'll get back to maybe what they do, I'm sure, at some point, right? And a lot of times you meet people in work contexts anyway. So I want to ask people what they do for fun. That's an aside. So I asked Rob, hey, what do you do? And he goes, well, I serve as the vice president of student affairs. And I said, oh. And that caught my attention. I thought, well, that's weird. Why did he say I serve as? Most people say I am the vice president of student affairs. And he said, I serve as the vice president of student affairs. So a couple weeks later, I asked him, so why do you say it that way? It caught my eye or my ear. And he said, well, it's not who I am. It's something I get to do. And I thought, that is a beautiful, beautiful sentiment. It's not who I am, but it's something that I get to do. So he said, I serve as. And so I have tried really hard to take that to heart and to share that with people, because I felt like that's a really freeing concept when people can say, I serve as this, or I serve as a coach. I serve in this role. I get to do these things, but it doesn't define who you are, whether you're a doctor, whether you're a musician, whether you're a pastor, whether you're a director of communications, whatever it is, right? I mean, it could be any of these things. You're a college basketball coach. All of these kinds of things are just things that we get to do, because ultimately they go away, right? And they don't define who we are as people. So there's some things we're going to talk about on this podcast. We're going to talk about identity, who you are when the titles fall away. Because really, and I talked about this a lot with student athletes when I was working in a university level, was, hey, what happens if football or basketball or soccer goes away tomorrow? And I got a lot of blank stares back and a lot of pauses and even some tears at times, right? When people had to kind of dive into that, when you're age 18, 19, 20, and you think you're invincible and you think, I'm going to do this forever. That was a question that a lot of folks weren't prepared for. And I think it's even a lot of folks aren't prepared for that question at age 50 or even as they near retirement. What do they do when they don't have a job? When they don't know, or they get laid off, or they quit their job, or they have a family medical thing that comes up, and all of a sudden they're quitting their job, and that's not part of who they are anymore or what they get to do, right? And so these are the things, identity, what you are when the titles go falling away. You're not all of a sudden Dr. So-and-so, you're just who you are, and you have no job. Calling, that's a big word. We talked about that in our office a lot. What keeps tapping you on the shoulder, right? For some people, that's a conscience. For some people, that's listening to their inner guide. For some people, it's the Holy Spirit. For some people, it's just discernment and wisdom. And whatever tradition you come from and whatever background you have, whatever your belief system is, there's still often this thing inside of everybody, I think, that says, hey, here's what you're good at, right? Here's what you should do. Here's what you should be doing. And sometimes it's easier to go after those things than others. Purpose, the why beneath the paycheck. Why do you do what you do? We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about leadership, which is not just a position. You don't have to be high up in a firm or in an organization or wherever you're at to lead. And so we're going to talk about what that looks like for people, whether they're at the top of a food chain, the middle, or the bottom, and how they have found ways to lead from those positions. Career, that's the long arc, right? That's not just your next move. That's a bigger concept that we're going to talk about with folks as well, what their career arc has looked like, what their hopes and dreams were maybe when they're 18, 19, and what they look like later, or what they are right now, depending on their age. And then jobs. We'll talk about the jobs that people are in and what they love, what they don't, and what that looks like, and some wisdom that can come back from those. We're going to come back to these things often and really again and again with every guest. Identity, calling, purpose, leadership, career, and job. The guests on this show are going to run the gamut. Some will be world-class doctors. Some will be broadcasters, coaches, authors, leaders you might recognize. Some will have much lower profiles because, let's be honest, most of us do, and that's not a liability by any means. It's a reality, and that's who most of us end up being, in a lower profile role, and that's perfectly fine. What I want us to make sure we keep coming back to is, who am I? Why am I here? What can I do right where I am to make this a better place to live? That might sound a little corny, but it's true, right? I'm asking other people to be honest on this show, so I should probably be honest too. My wife and I joke that when I'm at my best, I'm much like the character Ted Lasso in bringing joy and challenging folks in a positive way. And he's a fictional football coach from the United States who goes to coach soccer in Britain. And it is a fascinating look at leadership and the human spirit and what people do when it comes to their identity and their calling. And so when I'm at my best, full-on Ted Lasso is who I am. Curious, encouraging, grounded, hopeful, joyful. When I'm at my worst, Larry David, Curb Your Enthusiasm, 100% cynical, frustrated, easily annoyed, and irritated with little things. And that's when I'm doing things that don't give me life and joy. That's what happens when I'm not living into the gifts that I have. And we're going to talk with guests about that. Hey, how do you identify the gifts that you have? How do you encourage other people in your life and point out the gifts that they have and say, hey, here's what I see in you. Here's what you bring to the table. Here's where you're not prescribing a job for them, but you're saying, here's the gifts I see in you. And hopefully that will start pushing folks to do that with people around them. And I want to make sure that that's a main emphasis of this show. When I'm doing the things that give me life and joy, it's Ted. And when I'm not, that's when I turn into a real jerk, right? Larry David's a complete jerk on Curb Your Enthusiasm. If you've ever seen the movie Office Space, there's a moment where the main character, Peter Gibbons, is asked, what would you do if you had $1 million? And most people answer that question with some kind of escape. Oh, I would just go live on the beach, or I would some kind of an escape. But the deeper question really is, and it's kind of a silly question and a cliched question, but would you still want to contribute, right? It's the same thing as when you retire. Are you just going to sit around? Are you going to do something? Are you going to volunteer? Are you going to make the world better while you're not having the commitment of a full-time job? Like, what is it that you want to contribute? What gifts and skills do you have? And maybe it is financial, right, for those folks. Maybe it's volunteering, whatever it looks like. So most people answer that $1 million question with escape. And I think I used to as well. But I joke around now, if I ever won the lottery, I would not just not work. I would do only the things that bring me joy and bring life to people around me. We go back to those 4 concepts of Ikigai, right? Something you love, something that you're good at, something that you get paid to do, although if you won $1 million, although now it'd be probably much more than that, right? If you had enough money where you didn't need to worry about that, and also what the world needs. Man, the world needs a lot of things right now. We need love. We need encouragement. We need compassion and empathy. We need people to motivate and lead folks around us to bring out the best in them, just like what I talked about with what Ted Lasso does in that show. So this podcast is here to not to tell you like, hey, quit your job and go for that one thing. It's not here to to work on your resume. It's not here to give you any kind of 5-step plan. It is here to help you ask better questions, name what you're already sensing, and realize you're not behind. You're just in process, right? If you're somebody who's been asking, who am I really beneath the titles? What season am I in right now? How do life, career, and identity actually fit together? That's what we're going to talk about. You're not broken if you're asking those things. You're paying attention. Did you hear me? You're not broken. You're paying attention. And the world needs people that are paying attention to these things and are not on autopilot, right? We need folks that want to live wide awake and with enthusiasm and energy and joy, because those people, it's contagious, right? It's contagious. And so when you find out a way to get into what you're good at, what you love to do, something you can get paid for, and something that the world needs, man, the more of us that are in that sweet spot, right? The more of us that are in that sweet spot of Ikigai, then the better off we're all going to be, because that becomes contagious. I can become more like Ted Lasso and less like Larry David, not by pretending life is easy or some rose-colored glasses, but by doing things that give us life and living into them, knowing what to say yes to, knowing what to say no to. Boy, that is hard. Well, I'm going to ask those questions of our guests. Hey, what's something that you've said yes to that you probably should have said no to? What's something you said no to that you should have said yes to? And some counsel for folks out there and some wisdom. There's room for all of those questions. There's room for you here. I'm excited to get going with Caller ID. I'm Brandon Davis Wells, and this is where life, career, and identity meet. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to the Caller ID podcast. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe with all of your friends on all of your social media platforms. Thanks again. Signing off, Brandon Davis Wells.